one of the effects of emotional trauma is this phenomenon called derealization, right? Where it's like suddenly you're in a place and it feels like you're disconnected from the environment in some way. And it's like things may look different. And sometimes, depending on how significant it is, it's like things may even look kind of fuzzy around the edges, or like there's a little bit of static or something, and the colors don't look quite right. And like when people's voices come in, they don't sound like they normally do. Like if you're in the room with them, they suddenly sound like different, distant in some way. And when you talk or you try to think, it's almost like things are happening in slow motion, or like you're wading through peanut butter or something, or wading through water in order to try to get thoughts out and to say things. I mean, people on the outside can't tell, but inside there's this sense of like, wow, I feel disconnected. I feel detached. It's almost like I'm in a dream state, and it can really be distressing because there's kind of this simultaneous sense of like, can people tell that I'm nuts right now? I mean, can people tell that this is happening? And am I acting weird? Am I suddenly acting crazy? Am I talking slow? Am I, there, some of this kind of panic can happen when we get into those states. And I have had that a lot, particularly earlier on in life, right? And nowadays if it happens, it's fairly rare and for just a very, very short period of time. But there'd be times when I could go hours being in that state of derealization where it's just like, I feel like I'm watching a movie. I feel just so disconnected with the environment. And what I want to, if you are experiencing that, I just want to tell you that's a sign that you have a normal brain that is trying to deal with something that is very distressing. And I will say that as somebody who would observe you from the outside, you are not going to look any like you're crazy or like your speech patterns are changed or anything like that when you're experiencing that derealization. I mean, you're going to look normal. So it's not like you're going to be exposed and everybody's going to recognize how crazy you are or anything like that, right? Even though it might feel that way, it just feels like, God, man, what in the hell's going on? And I want to say things, but it's like my brain doesn't seem to be working right, and my speech seems to be slow and weird, but it doesn't come out that way, but it feels that way. And what is happening inside the brain when we experience that derealization? There's this phenomenon that the brain does that's called dissociation when it is experiencing some kind of distress. Now, when we have trauma early on, especially earlier in life, one of the ways that the brain copes with that, right, is it starts to detach itself. It starts to disconnect kind of our conscious awareness from our emotions, right? And so, over time, it could be that we have no idea what we're feeling, even though emotions may be raging in here and we're behaving in ways that we don't understand. And it's like, why do I suddenly feel this ill-defined sense of agency to run, or just like I can't sit still, or something terrible is going to happen, or there's somebody hiding around the corner, or I just have these visions of something bad happening, right? When we have that dissociation from our emotions, and derealization is just one form of that disconnection from our emotional state. But what's happening in a derealization is that is a moment when some of that detachment is happening in the moment, right? And so all of a sudden it's like my feelings and my sense of where I am and being connected to the world is somehow feels disconnected in a way. And it can be quite distressing because when you're in that, I mean, before I really understood the all of the science and what was going on with the brain and all of those kinds of things, I used to just freak out like, oh my God, am I losing my mind? Am I going crazy? And can people tell? Because if people really knew what I was experiencing right now, they would think, oh my God, who is this guy? This guy is a nut job. We got to get him out of here. But the thing that will oftentimes trigger that sense of derealization is when we are in novel situations, or when we are somehow in an unsafe, or something that just feels stressful and new. And like, for example, if you go into a new job on the first day and you start working, and all of a sudden it's just, you get into this space where you're like, I'm looking around and this room looks almost not real. I feel like I'm in a dream state, that this isn't really happening, and that these people, they ask me questions and I try to interact with them, but it feels like my brain just is disconnected in some way. And what I'll say is that, as you heal, right, as you are able to process through some of the trauma that happened in the past, and just put some framework on it, and start to build a narrative story about what had happened in the past, so that it can be put in its own place historically in your life, then it's like those events don't keep being pulled into the present and kind of trigger some of this derealization and dissociation that can happen. And so if you're experiencing this, it's not that you have a broken brain, right? It's that you just have a normal brain that had experienced some emotional trauma. And for whatever reason, when you are showing up in environments, typically if they're novel or they're stressful in some way, overstimulating in some way, it can trigger some of these emotional trauma responses, right? And we can go into this state of derealization. Doesn't mean that you're nuts, right? Doesn't mean that you're crazy. It doesn't mean that everybody can tell that you're a crazy person, or that you are suddenly sounding weird or anything like that. It may feel that way, but it's just not true. So what I would tell you is just, if you experience those things, pay attention. Pay attention to when those things happen. It may even be helpful to get a journal, right? And when you experience those things, write down kind of what was going on, what was the environment, what was happening around me that kind of triggered that. How long did it last? Did people say anything to me like, "Are you okay?" or something like that? Because maybe they do. Maybe, suddenly we just kind of freeze up when we go into that space, and somebody's like, did something just happen? Are you okay? But just write that down, right? And just observe it, right? In the beginning, you don't need to try to fix that, because derealization, when that happens, is simply a symptom. It is not a cause. It is not that you have some kind of organic brain disease. It is that, some kind of trauma trigger is being pulled into the present, and we're going into this semi-state of dissociation, this derealization place. And it's something that gets better over time when you actively try to heal some stuff from your past. But the important first step, just observe it, right? Without judgment. Just go, that's happening. I remember watching this YouTube video of this bald-headed guy who told me not to worry about it and just write it down, right? And then go home and just jot down a little note about when it happened. And if you do that, what you will probably find is a pattern of when these things tend to get evoked, right? And in most cases, not all, right? But in most cases, it is because there is something that is different, something where we feel exposed, something where we feel insecure, something that is new. Or sometimes this happens when we are doing something that we're not sure we're supposed to be doing, or this feels like we're doing something that is out of character of our of what we normally do. And so, and that can even be, if we're trying to step out of our comfort zone and do something positive, we can even experience some of that derealization, because it's like, oh my God, this is not me. I feel vulnerable. Everybody can see that I'm a fraud, right? Everybody can see that I'm a fake. They can see right through me. And just, all I'd say is just chill. Don't worry about it. Pay attention to it. It's not that it doesn't matter, right? It's not that it can't be distressing, but it is not necessarily a sign that you're crazy. It's not necessarily a sign of like some greater psychosis or something like that. I mean, it can be, but in most cases, it just isn't. It's a trauma response of crap that happened in your childhood that is being pulled into the present. And if you just observe it without judgment, just be present with it, observe it, notice it, write it down, and over time you'll start to see a pattern of kind of what tends to trigger that. And then if you're in a situation like that, and you kind of know that about your brain and how some of your trauma responses tend to get triggered and show up, then if you're in an environment where that happens, you're like, oh, it's not as big of a deal, right? And that will actually foster a little bit more of a sense of safety, a little bit more of a sense of groundedness, and will help you navigate through those times without as much distress while you're going through the healing journey of your past. So anyway, I hope you found this helpful. We'll talk to you soon.